Good afternoon. Welcome to TNCRadio.live. And this is the Truckers Network Radio Show. And now here's your host, Shelley Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Yes, this is the Truckers Network Radio Show on TNCRadio.live, where we offer the entertainment, sports, weather, traffic, news, and information that commercial drivers need and want to hear. Mental health is a huge topic today with drivers and pretty much everyone. Today, we have a prominent psychologist with us. Dr. Greg Cason has starred in the Bravo series LA Shrinks. He's been a psychological expert on the Nancy Grace Show, provided expertise in documentaries such as The Butch Factor, The Adonis Factor, and The Secret Tapes of the O.J. Case. In addition to his Beverly Hills practice, he writes a psychology column in Frontiers magazine. He's been quoted in People, The Huffington Post, and The Advocate. Dr. Cason is an expert in anger management, anxiety, and relationships. Welcome, Dr. Cason. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you. It is certainly a pleasure. Thank you for the intro. I'd forgotten about a lot of those, the movie.
You know, you've had quite the prominent career. For our listeners who are unfamiliar, how about you talk about yourself and your background and how you help your patients?
Well, oh my goodness, because that's a big thing. My thing is I got into psychology, I think primarily because of, as most people do, because of their family life. And I had a brother who was disabled, and it taught me that people see the world differently. It also taught me that other people were afraid of him, and I could see from a very young age there was nothing to fear. So I grew up just kind of knowing that people had a different view, and I wanted to understand that view. And so my love of understanding that extended all the way back to elementary school. But that fast forward, I decided to go into psychology. It wasn't something my family encouraged me to do. It was something I was just drawn to magnetically, and I went through UCLA, then I was working at UCLA. That I went then to Cal State Northridge, got a master's degree, and then got a PhD at University of Houston, and then went to UT Austin for my internship, and wound up back at UCLA for my fellowship, where I still hold a faculty appointment now.
So, how did you make all of these prominent breaks? I mean, let me rephrase that. So, how did you get into Hollywood essentially and get so much prominence? I mean, that's just wow.
Yeah, excuse me. I would say, I don't know, and what on one end, except that I'm in the middle of town, and I have a lot of contact with people. So when certain things come up, it's very easy to contact me and say, pop over to my office, or ask me to come in to do something. So that's kind of how it happened. Like, I live just down the street from CNN, so it was very easy for me to do Nancy Grace, which I did like over 50 times. Or it was easy for me to do, other things around town. So, but I think the point of why I even did stuff, why I was so drawn, is
Mhm.
because I wanted to help people outside of the therapy room. I love being
Okay.
in the therapy room, but I really thought there's a broader message, and it's to make psychology accessible and easy for everybody. And that was what always my goal was, is to make it something that everybody can have, instead of somebody who can only afford a specialist to get. So that was always my point, and it will continue to be my point. It's really my mission until I'm off this earth.
Well, I think too, it made it more acceptable. I think decades ago there was a stigma. You have to go to a shrink,
Yeah.
and actually watching somebody on TV and realizing, wow, um, psychologists aren't scary people, and they make a lot of sense.
That was really my goal in doing that series, and even featuring my family in the series. It was that I wanted to show that, hey, I'm a real person. I have struggles just like everybody else, and that but I also really want to help people. That my mission primarily is to make people's lives better, and that's what makes my life better. Every time someone else is happy, I become happier too.
So, what did you do on the Nancy Grace show and some of the documentaries and so forth? Were you asked about specific topics or?
Yes, I apologize for my throat. Who knows what's going on? Nancy Grace was an especial thrill for me because they would sort of say, okay, these are the cases we're working on. Almost inevitably, by the time the show was recorded, just a few hours later, the cases would be totally thrown out the window and they were doing something else, because that's how fast the news worked. And she worked on murder cases specifically. And anytime there was an advancement in the murder case, that she would actually start to deal with that real time on the air. And she was, as you saw, she was a pretty hard charging attorney.
Mhm.
And so when we would go up with her, she would challenge us as much as she would challenge someone in the courtroom. So she would push back on whatever kind of thing you were presenting. Sometimes she agreed, sometimes she didn't. But basically, you just went in there and presented your opinion of whatever was thrown at you at that moment. And I will tell you, 80% of the time, I had no idea what was about to come.
So, was that a little bit intimidating?
She was incredibly intimidating. I will say that was the first time I ever really broke out in a sweat in doing television, was working on her show, because you'd be in this tiny little room and she would turn to, she would go to you, and she was just hard charging at times. And it wasn't that you couldn't defend your opinion. It was just, she was who she was. But and I can understand how people on a court or in a trial system actually do have difficulty with attorneys, even when they are telling the absolute opinion and the truth. So she was just great in that particular way, because I will tell you, when we went off the air, she was the sweetest, kindest, most funny person you've ever seen. So it was really just professional.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
She just kind of flipped a switch and there she was as an attorney. And yeah.
Yeah, she was a smart one.
So, what did you do with the Butch Factor, the secret tapes of the OJ case? For those who may not be familiar with all of that.
Yeah, a lot of those they were different documentaries. The Butch Factor was about men and masculinity, so we kind of dealt with that in that particular thing, and I think that was a unique documentary in that particular way. The secret tapes of the OJ was really incredible, because what the producers were able to get a hold of were tapes from the LAPD that no one had listened to. And they had me actually pore over the tapes, so I got to listen to them as well, and to analyze and talk about them from a psychological point of view. What you could clearly see is some of the really very poor mismanagement, because he was such a huge celebrity, big football star, movie star. He was so beloved by these policemen that sometimes it seems like there was a little more personal banter, and he was able to sort of keep them deflected away from what was going on. So there was definite concerns in the tapes and listening to it, but mostly it was revealing about his personality. And it was really a fascinating exploration. I think it was a very good series that really delved into a lot of good stuff.
And you've been quoted in People and the Huffington Post. Did all of that come after the documentaries and some of the shows you've been on?
Yeah, the Huffington Post actually asked me to write quite a few things. I have been quoted by them quite a bit, like with relationship things.
Mm-hmm.
But they first came knocking when they wanted me to write something for them because of the TV shows. That's true. People, it was just, People didn't tell me. They just did a feature. And there were just many things along the way. So it all kind of happens when you least expect it. You can really go hard for something for a long time, and it may never come to fruition. And then suddenly something will pop that you weren't even looking out for. So that's the very nature of that business, unfortunately.
So how long were you in practice before you became a celebrity, essentially?
Practice. I have 20.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I really focused on being a good psychologist first, and that's always been my goal, number one. So one, I had a lot of practice and even got licensed before I finished my PhD. So I got
Wow.
licensed as a master's um, person in Texas. So I still hold that license. And then I got my PhD and got my psychological license. The thing, though, that is you practice the entire time. So I was seeing lots and lots of clients for many years before I was able to get licensed. But from the point of licensure, which was for me 1998, I was very, very serious, had good jobs, and I did. I was like a director of a counseling center, and I, ran a big, or I was partially, and I was about over a quarter of a big human services organization, and there were a lot of different things I did along the way because just number one, I wanted to help people. Media came a little bit later.
How'd they find out about you? I guess I kind of wanted to know that because it's not usual that a psychologist is all of a sudden out in front and prominent expert and a celebrity.
I guess I've always liked doing media. So when something comes toward me, I'll usually say yes. So I think that, and how people have found out have just been, again, it just, people will see my ad, or they'll see a picture, or they'll get to meet me, or they'll know a friend of a friend, and it'll just be connected like that.
So you have tenacity as a psychologist.
Yeah, I suppose that is exactly correct. Yes. I don't want to give up on that because, again, that's part of my mission as a psychologist.
There you go. We're talking with Dr. Greg Cason, an expert in anger management, anxiety, and relationships. We'll be back with more on the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned. Great leaders challenge their people not to stop at the first right answer. Tighten the Lug Nuts is the book that will help you move past that first right answer to be more effective, more productive, and more successful. This book serves as a blueprint that can be easily applied by leaders, entrepreneurs, truckers, owner-operators, all of us in our everyday lives. This is one of the best leadership books you can read to help you accelerate towards your personal and professional goals. Plus, a portion of the proceeds will be donated to truckerschristmasgroup.org. Visit TightenTheLugNuts.com to order your copy today. This is the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly. We're talking with Dr. Greg Cason, an expert in anger management, anxiety, depression, and relationships. Dr. Cason, I was wondering maybe if you could elaborate. You're an expert in these areas. What is the most prominent issue you're finding with your clients? My thought is it might be anger right now, but I don't know.
You might see a lot of anger. I agree with you on the anger right now, because right now, as we're coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing people fly off the handle. But I believe a lot of that has an underlying cause in anxiety. And anxiety overall is the number one problem in the United States. Anxiety is very hard to spot sometimes, and it comes out in various different forms. But ultimately, anxiety is going to be the problem. Now, if we want to talk anger, which is going on right now, let's talk, because that problem I've encountered just in going to grocery stores, or, you watch videos of people on airplanes. I mean, the anger right now seems to be out of control, or just on the road. It's been really a problem.
What do you think's causing that anger? Is it the frustration? Is it the loss of control? You said it's anxiety, which
Yeah.
obviously people were anxious. Gosh, who wouldn't be? What's this creepy crud virus that's killing everyone? I mean, that's going to make anyone anxious.
Yeah, and I think, it not only killed people, but it also disabled the entire nation, in fact, the entire world.
Yeah.
So, the anxiety, because of the unknown of the future, caused everyone's senses to heighten. But the anger, I think, started to come out as soon as we started to have a vaccine. It was really fascinating to me how things actually increased. Now, we saw the first anger explosion, I think, last year during the race riots around the nation.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of that happening. And then we saw a huge thing happen again around the start of the year, especially after the vaccines. And I often wonder if that's a big cause of it, because now that we started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, all of a sudden people had something to tie things to. and they started to see a light at the end of the tunnel, but also started to make them very upset, angry, and just wanted to get out. Anger itself is sort of an interesting thing. I think you're very right about frustration and lack of control. That's sort of what's underneath, but that's not what people are thinking. What they're thinking, like when somebody cuts you off on the road, what you're thinking is sort of basic thing. Number one, that person just did you something very wrong. Number two, that person is bad for doing that wrong thing. And often we see people as not really all that human when they cut us off. We see them as just that, a-hole who just cut us off.
Right.
And then number three, that person must be punished or taught a lesson. And that's why people do things like flip people off, honk their horn, chase them down, do a variety of things, because anger starts to turn into rage, and then we're off to the races.
It's a real primal emotion that goes back to what the reptilian brain.
Yes.
And anger, when it's channeled properly, is probably a good thing if you can make it into something else, but to suddenly have an anger reaction, it's so counterproductive.
Well, yes. I mean, you look at it this way, that all emotions have a purpose. So we often will think that, oh, there's no purpose to anger or anxiety or depression, but actually there really is. There's a purpose to all of those emotions. The purpose to anger, if we really get down to it, is to either protect us if we're being attacked, or to separate us from somebody else, to keep us away from a problem. If we're very angry about somebody, we either want to squelch that somebody or we want to get the hell away from that somebody. But anger is not going to cause us to come together with a person. It will actually pull us away. So the purpose might be good, but then sometimes people with anger problems, they express anger too much or see things too much from an angry point of view, that they actually then cause problems in their life because they basically drive everybody away.
When you think about it, anger is even something that other species have, animals, for instance. But I don't think anxiety is something other species have. It just seems to be unique to the human condition, and it seems so counterproductive.
Well, I wonder, I know we see it in dogs and cats. We do see anxiety there. So, and I've not looked at a lot of animal species for that, but the way we express anxiety, I have to say, probably is unique to us. Anxiety is really the belief that something bad is going to happen and I can't handle it. So if you look on the good side of that, it keeps you away from danger. And probably animals do have that to a certain extent. When they see, let's say they're a little gopher and they see a giant coyote, they probably do feel a form of anxiety and know that they need to run and hide because, that coyote might get them. But if it's too, if you're just walking around with free floating anxiety, just anxiety about everything, thinking you can't handle anything, that's when we get into a real problem territory.
Yeah, and that seems to be what's unique to humans. And we ruminate on stuff and make it bigger than it really is.
Yes. And ruminating is really an interesting process. I mean, I could go off about all these things, but ruminating is that when you have thoughts go around and around in your head and you can't get them out, and it's like the same problem going over and over and over. It's your brain trying to solve a problem, which is so interesting. But often rumination becomes the problem because we get something stuck in our head. So often the only way through is just to really kind of backtrack and start to really understand what brought you there in the first place. And often that leads to other emotions. So rumination has a purpose, but it can also become the problem.
And something very easy for drivers to do because they can be driving hundreds of miles with no other interruption, and they're just kind of locked into taking that problem, and they're staring at the white line. It's 2:00 in the morning, and they can't get it out of their head.
I would think that, yeah, being a trucker and being on the road, because that rumination might lead us, let's say you're having a problem at home. Rumination might lead you to address the problem with your husband or wife. Or it might lead you to address the problem with your kids or in-laws or whatever. But if you are out on the road, you may not have that luxury. So it's just stuck in your head, and then that thought keep going around and around, and you can't really do much about it, can actually cause more of a problem. And it's causing a problem for the person who's having it, not for anybody else. So it's sort of a self sabotage in a particular way, because you actually feel much worse.
Is this learned behavior as a child, essentially?
It's a great question, because in a sense, it's both learned and biological. These are natural things we all fall upon. So we all have these abilities and skills to fall upon. But I would say if you have a parent who ruminated or demonstrated that for you, or you had a good friend or something like that, you're going to be more prone to use that particular thing. So it's both. We think that almost everything has a combination of nature and nurture. It's both, people are born a particular way, and then they grow up in an environment which leads them more one way or the other.
Yeah, because when you think about it, little ones really aren't afraid of anything. That's why you're always like, no, don't do that. That's hot. No.
Yeah, they do have to learn the limits of the world. That's true. But you know what little ones are, it's fascinating to me about babies. Babies are pretty amazing in many ways. And you can learn about some biological fears. Most babies are actually afraid of heights. And they've been able to demonstrate this by putting a big glass top table down between two other dark tables or opaque tables. And they try to make the baby crawl across it, and babies won't do it.
Interesting.
So they will see that, the baby can recognize they're too high. At the same time, babies, there have been schools that have done this. It's really crazy to watch, where they throw a baby into the water and the baby will naturally swim.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So babies are amazing creatures in so many ways. So we can probably understand a lot from ourselves by watching babies.
So maybe they're closer to their primal instincts. Obviously, heights can be danger.
Yeah.
But the swimming, well, they've been in amniotic fluid, so that's something natural, right? Something that they're used to.
Maybe so. That may be as good a theory as any, but they do seem to have a natural ability to preserve their life if they're put in danger in particular ways. If babies, when they're dropped, which I would never recommend, but will do a clutching response. They'll try to grab onto something. So the babies are pretty amazing in some interesting ways.
Very interesting. We're going to have some more wonderful insight from Dr. Greg Cason coming up. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more.
Highway heroes, 18 wheels, keep moving on as the world stands still. Waco 19, you got the Rolling Stone. Truck on, truck on, truck on.
TNCRadio.live wants to make sure you purchase a copy of John Schneider's new album, Truck On, that features great songs like Born at a Truck Stop, Truck On, Stand On It, and Cowboys Don't Get Old. John Schneider rocks the life of a trucker in this album. The lyrics are clever, the music is great, and his vocals are his usual best. What's even better is a portion of the proceeds from the Truck On album will benefit St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund, which helps truckers and their families in their time of need. Get the Truck On album at johnschneiderstudios.com or on Amazon. We'll feature a link on TNCRadio.live. Truckers and St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund will thank you. This is the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly. We're talking with Dr. Greg Cason, an expert in anger management, anxiety, and relationships. He's a prominent psychologist who has some terrific insight. We were talking about the natural instinct to protect ourselves as babies and how we kind of evolve, I guess. It's interesting that anxiety, which is part of the human condition. And like you said, Dr. Cason, it's something that we need to protect ourselves. But obviously, constant anxiety is something that is very bad. And I'm just wondering, is that something that society seems to have more of now? It seems like there's a pill for every kind of anxiety and depression. And I'm seeing so many people on drugs the past few decades.
Oh yeah, we could talk drugs. I'm of a mixed mind about it. One, I think that pharmaceutical psychotropic medications can be extremely helpful to many people in situations where they're needed. So number one is that they can be helpful, but when prescribed by a physician and they're done so with management, so the physician is watching them, making sure everything's okay. Unfortunately, because of the way the pharmacy ads or pharmaceutical ads have made people think that they want to try a pill for everything, and we're sort of taught that. So a lot of people will think that their solutions will come in a pill. And I have to say the kind of most interesting one is that they're really going after and trying to find a pill that will cure substance abuse, which kind of cracks me up because
Yeah.
Basically
Take a
you
pill
take
for a
one
pill.
pill for a pill. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting phenomenon. But I think it's not a black and white issue, and we get very dangerous when we say either they're all good or all bad.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if it's more common in North America, but it seems like people don't necessarily want to put the work into it. It's like, give me a pill, it'll cure it. I'll get on with my life.
Yeah, well, pills are a lot easier. You can
Mm-hmm.
pop a pill, swallow it, and you'll get on with your day as opposed to actually doing work. But what we do know is for something, say, like depression, if you stop taking the pill, typically the depression will come back. But sometimes the pill can be helpful for people who have depression into getting them out of the ditch, that they start to feel a little better so they can do the work so that they can
Sure.
keep themselves out of the ditch.
Do people even know they're depressed? Or it's kind of something that just
Amazing.
kind of creeps up, isn't it?
It's such an amazing question, I have to say, because yes, it actually does just creep up. And I would say a good portion of the United States has no idea when they're depressed, because they just feel like life is bleak, it's terrible. That's just what things are. There's no hope for the future. I'm a terrible person, worthless, hopeless, etc. I did actually a presentation, 2016. I was looking, that this may sound a little bit grim, but I was looking at middle-age suicide, and I did a keynote presentation at this conference, and I wanted to look at people like me. I'm a middle-aged guy, middle-aged white guy, and I was like, hey, well, I keep hearing about this happening, so I wanted to go and look at the phenomenon. Well, what I found was really shocking, and actually was duplicated in several studies that came after I started doing this work. So it's good. It's been verified. The bottom line is that what we're seeing in our nation, in America specifically, is that people in the middle-aged population are really suffering. So they may not. They number one have a higher suicide proclivity right now, but also that we're seeing that they're doing things that might advance or make their health worse, so that it might advance their death, like drinking too much, eating too much junk, being very depressed. But when you're very depressed, it often expresses itself in these sort of behavioral ways.
Right.
You
Yep.
don't want to get out of bed, or you do, or you can't sleep. It can be one or the other. You lose connection with other people. You isolate. Can't concentrate. Just feel terrible. And then your only remedies are like maybe drink, or maybe use some kind of pill to feel better for a temporary amount, and then this just drives other problems and people feel worse and worse.
Well, it's a terrible wheel. People drinking, if they have depression, they're drinking a depressant and increasing their anxiety. And then they feel like crap the next day and they have to do it again,
Yeah, and it's addictive. So your brain will go, hey, it's time for a cocktail. And then
Right.
it will just do that to you every day.
Sure.
And so you'll just be drawn to go get a cocktail, even if in the morning you say, no more, no more, no more. By evening, we lose our defenses. So it's really important to understand it. I think depression, especially in men, is very hard to identify because women are more prone as a group to say that, hey, I feel depressed, I'm sad, etc. Like to
Yeah,
kind of
women
look at it.
verbalize.
They verbalize, they'll look
Mhm.
at it straight on, even seek a connection with friends. Men typically will isolate, pull away, and they often won't want to admit that they feel bad and will often manifest as anger. So they feel
Yep.
more angry about things.
Mhm.
So it's really hard. Again, anger coming around, but sometimes anger is just a secondary emotion, or it comes like either after you're depressed or anxious.
So does testosterone in men interfere with their ability to really identify emotion because they have to go into the aggressive mode?
That's a great question, because that is something I haven't looked at. I've looked at the topic of alexithymia, which is the inability to identify emotions in oneself, where people get to a point that they really don't think they have emotions. And that's typically a male thing.
Mhm.
And that's why I'm saying it's a great question, because that could say it. Usually what testosterone does in healthy amounts is it helps men feel less depressed. So they
Yeah.
actually feel more clear-headed and less depressed, etc. But yes, they're more prepared for battle, so to speak.
Mhm.
But at the same time, does that also keep them blind to certain emotions? Emotions are there for information. They're there
Yep.
to help us. They're helped to guide us, give us information. They're not necessarily the truth, because sometimes emotions can lead us astray. But
Yes.
what they can do is just give us information about what we're thinking. But one thing we want to be aware of our emotions, but we don't want to operate completely from emotion, because then we'll never get anything done.
And some people do that. And
Yeah.
I've talked to various people in my lifetime where they get into a negative mindset, and they put thoughts in other people's heads. Well, that person doesn't like me, or I know that they thought this of me. It's like, how do you know this? Are you psychic?
Right.
Really?
That is actually something called mind reading. We try to teach people to be aware of that. So yes, you're exactly right. People will think that they know what someone else is thinking. They could be right. I could guess the right lottery numbers too. I never have, but one day I will. But the reality is that we can't always know why somebody is feeling or expressing or acting a certain way. And I know for me that I've been dead wrong before when I've tried to guess what someone else was feeling. And people do it. I work in therapy. People will say, you're probably thinking this. And I can say to them honestly, no, that never even came into my mind.
Yeah.
So, the mind reading mistake it's a very common thing. Going back to road rage, sometimes we mind read and think, oh, that person's trying to get me, they're being an
Sure.
a-hole to me, etc. But they may just be stuck in their own world, listening to a good song, or just
Yeah.
very sad about some event that happened at their house a half hour beforehand, so they're not paying attention,
Or they're
and it may
just
have
an angry driver.
or they're just or that. So it
Yeah.
really is not personal at all. They're just walking around hating the world. There could be that.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not somebody you'd want to talk to if they weren't in a car,
Yeah, that's true. There are those too.
So, yeah, it's interesting. How do we is this something we develop as children because we're trying to anticipate how to react to other people, and we just make it a habit? I don't personally try to read people's minds because I know that they could be somewhere completely not even in the room. How do people get into that? Is it insecurity?
Yeah, it could be insecurity. I think there's just kind of a typical human tendency that we
Mhm.
try to fill in the blank spots.
Okay.
And if we don't know what someone is saying, doing, thinking, how they're going to act, our antenna go up. And so we'll
Yeah.
try to fill in the blank spots so that we can make sense of what's going on. But sometimes we can be very wrong. So I do think it's a good idea to to be able to understand your own ability to handle things and to feel good about your own abilities, so that if somebody, even if they are thinking that terrible, awful thing, you could still handle it. I think what happens is we think somebody's thinking a terrible, awful thing because we're trying to either reassure ourselves that it's not happening or try to get rid of it.
Makes sense. Great insight. We're talking with Dr. Greg Cason, an expert in anger management, anxiety, and relationships. We're going to have some more great insight coming up right here on the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned. Great leaders challenge their people not to stop at the first right answer. Tighten the Lug Nuts is the book that will help you move past that first right answer to be more effective, more productive, and more successful. This book serves as a blueprint that can be easily applied by leaders, entrepreneurs, truckers, owner-operators, all of us in our everyday lives. This is one of the best leadership books you can read to help you accelerate towards your personal and professional goals. Plus, a portion of the proceeds will be donated to truckerschristmasgroup.org. Visit TightenTheLugNuts.com to order your copy today. This is the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly, and we're talking with Dr. Greg Cason, an expert in anger management, anxiety, and relationships. Speaking of relationships, Dr. Cason, what kind of issues are you seeing with your clients?
Well, we thought when we go into this pandemic that we'd have a big baby boom, but we're seeing kind of the opposite.
I read that. I was surprised. It's like, that's not the way things used to work.
Right. No.
When the lights are out and there's no power, guess what?
Yeah, but I think there's a difference between the lights being out one night and the lights being out for a whole year. And right. I think that's how people felt. And it's, you think it's like, what is it? Company breeds
misery loves company.
Misery loves company. Oh yeah, but I think it's familiarity breeds contempt is what I was going for. Sorry about that. And I think that unfortunately, when people are pushed together, all their stuff sort of comes out, and there's been less structure. We actually do better as a human species when we have more structure, believe it or not. So
even though a lot of us don't like structure.
No, but even, even I have to say, like somebody who really values their independence, like a trucker, they have agency over their life. They're in charge. They've got this thing. So they know they have to go from point A to point B, deliver this thing, And when you do all of that, that's structure, even though it's not like come in at 9 and end at 5. It's like you've got a purpose, you've got an end point, you've got an accomplishment, and you can point to that, and you've got a paycheck. All of that is good. And that actually helps people to become healthier and happier. During I think the pandemic, a lot of people were just kind of stuck at home. And, number one, we had all other stresses, financial, anxiety about illness, the kids being at home, not able to go to school. I mean, just all these different problems. So it actually made people much more unhappy, anxious, depressed. And then you're together with somebody else who's having that, and you're going to tend to fight more. So unfortunately, that's what we're seeing in couples, is this really kind of angry alliance that's happening. They're just angry together, and either they aim it at each other, or, if they could actually be better off aiming it elsewhere. But
I'd heard there were more divorce filings, but yet they couldn't get a divorce because the courts were closed.
Exactly.
Didn't know that. That's really interesting. I'll have to look into that. That's that's a sad statistic, but I could believe it.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the people have decided, wow, I'm spending so much time with you. There are things I didn't know about you, and I really don't like you. Is that a possibility?
No, of course, that's a possibility. That would be a healthier reason. If you actually really find out you don't like somebody, then that makes some sense. But the one thing I know about relationships is often every relationship hits a bad patch. And sometimes the bad patch can be very bad. But what the key in relationships, a lot of people think it's the best relationships don't hit bad patches. Let me assure you that they do, and multiple times. The best relationships hit bad patches and recover. So the key is in the recovery, not not to avoid the bad patch, because we all run into those.
What would you say are the biggest struggles that couples have?
The biggest.
Mhm.
We kind of joke that there are three biggies: sex, money, and children.
Mhm.
And that's sort of where everything revolves. Sex is an interesting one. And because sex is, two people have to do it, obviously. I mean, or you
Right.
could have more, perhaps. You could do sex with one person, but it's not the same. But the number one thing is, basically you need two to tango. And that means that both people have to be on the same page and agree. All kinds of other issues can interrupt that process, especially when there are these other issues we've talked about: anger, depression, anxiety. They can really do a number on a couple. And I think that also, physical things like when people slow down because they're feeling physically ill, or they've gained a lot of weight, so they lose energy, or lose function in some particular way, or maybe smoking causes those issues. Whatever it is, that they actually are going to have a lot of things working against them. So those three issues are probably the biggest. Sex is probably one of the main ones I often see. Money's a big one, because money, basically, for all the reasons, unless you have a lot of it, it becomes an issue just to survive. So it's a matter of survival. So it becomes primary. And kids are just kids. I mean, kids from basically age 1 to 18, any couple is going to have that struggle. They typically are okay in the first year of life. People typically rally during that. But, then it becomes real life after that. And then it
Mhm.
becomes really difficult.
As the children go through different stages, and
Yes.
and unlike a puppy that you can housebreak and everything, and they're going in the right direction, kids, don't always go in the same incorrect direction. It's like,
Oh,
wait a
great.
minute.
In fact, they break you at some point. I mean, they want to break out of the house. So it's
Uh-huh.
a whole different
And you
thing.
can't put them on a leash.
You can't.
so, so what would you like to tell our listeners, and how can they get a hold of you? Because you've got some wonderful insight. I don't know if you work with people virtually as well, or
I do. I do. You can always get a hold of me at drgreg.com. But the thing I'd like to tell is, you don't need to get in touch with someone like me. I mean, I'm not trying to put myself out of business, certainly not. But I will say that there's so much you can do to be able to improve your mental health. And you can do that on a daily basis. And you don't have to do all the sort of mumbo jumbo. I'm a huge believer in something like meditation. You know what else is a form of meditation? Is just driving. What's really interesting is you can just allow yourself to be out on the road and driving, and allow your mind to calm and clear. And so I know many drivers know this phenomenon. I hear it a lot. So there are ways to improve your mental health. Also, exposure to nature, good eating, getting enough sleep, exercise, and improvement of relationship. If I could give one tip there, I would
Mhm.
really say, if you can just a couple of times a day send a text or a phone call to just say hello, just thinking about you, I miss you. Those little things make the big difference in relationships. So connection, connection, connection. Those are really going to help.
And for our drivers, that's definitely something that they need to have. Make a
Absolutely.
connection, maybe every day. You think?
Every day. In fact, I would say more than once a day, maybe twice a day would be really wonderful. How nice it would be to get a random text when someone has to pull over to use the restroom. They could just send a text, "Hey, just thinking about you," and then get back on the road. How nice it would be to get that text for so many people.
Absolutely. And I think that sometimes couples forget to do that.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah, they
They get
really
out of the honeymoon phase, and it's like, gee, does he even think about me anymore? Yeah.
Yes, I do think that is unfortunately the big issue, because as we talked about, you're filled with things like the kids, money, just trying to take care of the household, or health conditions. There's so many things that get in our way, that can get in the way of improving your relationship, which actually you don't need to do a lot of. You just need to do it consistently, and always and sort of think of putting things in an emotional bank. You're always trying to help the other person keep their bank filled with good feelings.
Mhm.
They have a more positive perspective. I would think everything would improve.
That's exactly right. Everything improves, and you can weather those setbacks and problems a lot easier when that's the case.
Excellent. It has been a pleasure talking with you, Dr. Cason. People can reach you again at drgreg.com. Is that correct?
That is exactly right. Yes.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure talking with you as well. And I really hope the best for everyone out there, and safe driving and safe in your travels.
Excellent. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly. Stay tuned for more coming up. You've been listening to an interview with Dr. Greg Cason, a celebrity psychologist who's been seen on shows like The Nancy Grace Show and LA Shrinks. He has wonderful insight on mending minds, healing hearts, and reigniting relationships. For more information about Dr. Greg, be sure to check out his website at drgregcason.com. That's spelled Dr. DRGREGCASON.com. All of the material you hear on TNCRadio.live on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of TNCRadio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live.